Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you as always from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, we've talked a lot, and we've talked a lot on this show. And if you attend any events these days, you know, there's this kind of common theme that goes on in the industry, and it goes a little bit like this. Hey, you know, there are some innovative, disruptive companies out there. You know, whether it's Netflix or Airbnb or Uber or, you know, pick your favorite sort of unicorn startup company. They are disrupting your industry. You are in big trouble. And if you don't move to becoming a completely software-based company that is building everything in microservices and the newest, coolest technology, well, you know, you might as well dig a grave for your company and update your resume because you're going out of business very quickly. And it's a fun sort of meme to follow if you're watching a keynote, and it leaves a lot of the audience going, what am I gonna do? Like, that doesn't seem like a great future for me. And so, you know, we talk to a lot of people, we get a chance to talk to a lot of people, and we go, is that reality? You know, what is available for people, and how are people moving forward, you know, in this sort of natural progression? And so we're very lucky tonight. Aaron and I get a chance to see a lot of events, and we get a chance to you know, see a lot of talks. And one of them really caught our eye lately. So we're very, very lucky tonight to have Lachlan Evenson, who is Senior Solutions Architect for Deus and previously was with Lithium Technologies. Lachlan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to share, you know, our journey to microservices and really give our experiences and dig into what we learned at my 2.5 years at Lithium Technologies.
Yeah.
So
let me tee this up a little bit. So you caught our eye. You did a talk, and we'll, as always, we'll post it in the show notes. That was sort of called Microservices Memoirs, and you did a fabulous job of sort of walking through your experience. So first up, tee us up. You know, your background and what helped you, you know, give this talk. Where'd you get all the experience that's in here?
Absolutely. So I was a cloud platform team lead at Lithium Technologies, and I spent 2.5 years there, and I came on board at a time where Lithium was starting their cloud journey. So they traditionally had on-premise data centers, and really the move was to get into private and public cloud. So I came on board to help build the tooling, the platform, and the infrastructure around that cloud journey at Lithium Technologies. I've now kind of moved on from Lithium, and I'm at Deus. And really what I'm trying to do there is accelerate this journey for other people. So bringing those learnings of the 2.5 years I was at Lithium to the wider market and really shortcut people's journeys. So, you know, that's really what inspired me with the Deus team, is that they're after that journey.
Yeah. So before we dive into the Lithium experience, just for anybody who doesn't know, who is Deus and what do they do? So
Deus, at Deus, we are really just accelerating the cloud native application acceleration. So getting people onto cloud native frameworks. So if you take a look at things like the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, and really what they're on about is building cloud native systems. So container packaged, dynamically managed, and microservice oriented. Okay. So what we're doing at Deus is building tooling around enabling that cloud-native application journey.
Okay, very cool. So you came on board a couple of years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago at Lithium. What was the charter? What were they wanting you to do? You know, you said I was there to help them build a cloud, but what did that mean at the time?
So what it meant was, we had traditional data centers. What we wanted to do was resourceify our internal infrastructure. So at the call of an API, we could pool our resources and provision VMs, containers, or those kind of resources on-prem. But we also wanted to augment our footprint with public cloud as well, because we saw tremendous value in moving some of our services to the public cloud, whether it be for geographical regions or spinning something up in a region we don't have that footprint. So we really came in, and the cloud platform was to build an offering in public and private cloud. So our public cloud was made up of AWS at that point and OpenStack on the private side. So really, you know, the tooling around that. Now, when we actually dug in and started building the infrastructure, what we found was, you know, there was a whole new virtualization journey that we had to undertake. So we didn't have any of the tooling or the automation around actually deploying workloads in a way that made sense to the cloud. So it was coming in, changing that whole infrastructure, and making it kind of cloud-centric. So that was what our overall charter was.
Yeah, and I know in the talk you called that sort of cloud version 1, and then as you move through your discussion, you kind of get into this idea that maybe that didn't it sort of solved a bunch of technical problems, but maybe it didn't solve kind of your ultimate customer demand or interaction. Talk about how you guys went from some realizations about that OpenStack AWS cloud to what you sort of realized as you put it in the hands of your end users and developers.
So I think if you look back, rewind 2 years ago at how people were building clouds and cloud platforms, it was very IaaS-centric. So you were tying together all these disparate resources into creating a story, right? So you were inadvertently creating a PaaS, and a PaaS of your own opinions of what you define as good and a good way to deploy applications. But you were using tooling that was probably born out of the operations journey, right? So you had an org structure and you had the engineering arm, the developers writing the code, and you had an operations arm, and those guys were responsible for maintaining the production lifecycle of the application, updates, upgrades, maintaining the system and the infrastructure. Now, when you go to the cloud, kind of the lines get blurred, and to talk about microservices in a vacuum, I think doesn't provide much context. When you think about microservices as a part of this larger journey to other cultural and technical changes like NoOps, DevOps, cloud, automation, when you think of it as this whole large big bang of all these pieces that are changing independently, it was hard to find our way in that journey. And I think, if I was to kind of sum up at the end of Cloud V1 was we'd actually made it more difficult for our customers, being the internal developers, to deliver their applications, which wasn't what we'd promised. And if we were to dig into really where we fell down there, I think, we approached the problem operationally. So we took a bunch of operational tools and tried to apply them to, a development app dev situation. And it was kind of clunky. So we were asking developers to do things they hadn't traditionally done that were taking care of operational teams.
Give us some examples. Yeah. What might that be?
So I think one example on the front end. So we were asking people on the development side, rather than packaging up their code or just being responsible for delivering the feature and the source code, we were asking them actually to package up the metadata around the code so that we could operationally deploy it, rather than making it fairly lightweight and a task that had traditionally been done by the operational team, right? They would take the source code in, wrap it in the lifecycle management suite that they'd had, and then deploy it. We were asking the developers to wrap that up and not giving them much direction on how to do it.
Gotcha. So you were maybe, for example, saying, hey, you have to be aware of like load balancers and scaling groups and storage IO and those sort of things that, like you mentioned, probably would have been an operations or an infrastructure type of function.
Yeah, that was exactly it. So asking them to, topics that had traditionally been SMEs, so you'd have subject matter experts in-house on your networking, your storage, your compute, and all around load balancing, you'd kind of thrown that over the fence, in essence, to the developers and asked them to kind of take care of it. Yep. I think one of the other things that we could have done better was we kind of went into a waterfall model where we went into a hole for 6 months and kind of came back and went, here it is, you guys start using it. And these guys being the developers, the end users, this isn't what we wanted. You haven't actually met our needs. So I think, pairing it up with things like Agile and running it more like a feature and app dev team, so that being your cloud platform team, I think it having that organization to actually support you to be successful, it matters.
Right. So I think what I'm sort of hearing what you're saying is, your goal, probably was ultimately, try and make developers more productive, get their applications into production faster, make them more agile. And what ended up happening was, you had this goal, but the approach that you took with it was very much kind of, not exactly, but sort of modeled on the same idea that people are now saying, well, you shouldn't build software that way. So you shouldn't, start from scratch, have 1,000 features to build out, wait until it's completely done. And then, like you said, just kind of throw it on people, 6, 12, 18 months later and go, isn't this what you wanted? Right? You need to think about your infrastructure platform as being sort of iterative in the same way that you're expecting your application sort of life cycle to evolve.
Yeah, that's what we found to be, true, is we need to run this and think about it like application developers rather than thinking about it operationally, where you lay something down and then it just starts to collect dust. You want to iterate. You want to have a model where you can iterate, change pieces, come up with new features and deliver them on demand. It kind of, on the operations side, you've come out of this world where everything is kind of in your control, but relinquishing some of that control and actually having external forces push your feature roadmap, I think is something that's was interesting for us to learn, right? So say, what would you guys like, rather than this is what you're going to get.
Right.
So actually having them on the journey and saying, guys, we are here to meet your needs, which is essentially the remit of the cloud platform team, was to actually deliver a platform that is going to make the developer's life easier. And really the business value from that was getting features out faster, the time to market, the time to value, all these kind of good things could be boiled up and delivered to management as a reason for investing in the cloud in the first place.
Yep. So, as you sort of moved along this talk that you've been giving, this experience that you've been sharing, you talk about the idea that you sort of had to go back to the drawing board. You had to come up with this idea of a V2 type of cloud platform. What was let's talk about this sort of in two parts. One is, what was the platform thinking that was going on, and then second, we haven't talked at all about the types of applications you're dealing with. You guys are Silicon Valley company. I mean, are you dealing with all microservices, or was there stuff there from before that you had to figure out how to deal with?
Yeah, so the Cloud V2 initiative, I think it was probably more of a cultural undertaking, or understanding how to deal with our customers.
Okay.
So rather than looking at it technically, which is what we'd done in the past, we started to look at how do we actually meet the needs of the customers, and what are we going to do to actually make them happy. So really going external facing, right? So really we wanted to stay in that, what business problem are we trying to solve? So is it getting code out faster? Is it getting better quality? What is the KPI around what you're delivering with this, cloud platform / microservice architecture that you're going to? So we'd made a decision internally that on the engineering side, we were going to level off, the code commits that were going into the old monolithic platform that made up some of the Lithium services, and really break that out so people could iterate within smaller teams on smaller code bases. And, it's like lessening the blast radius as you make changes. So what we needed was to build, a framework to support those microservices. But really, as I said, we wanted to run it like a feature team. We wanted incremental revolution. So we wanted to get the first feature out the door. We called it the MVP internally.
Yep.
But as we looked at what we were going to try and do, we said to ourselves, we're not going to go pick up everything that we've done and try and shove it into microservices. What we're going to do is leave everything as it is, and let's enable new teams from the get-go, and let's see how that goes. So we had some ambassador teams that we actually went in. We knew they had a feature to write that could be stood up as a microservice, and we actually got them through that whole journey of getting out their first microservice. And then we kind of did a retrospect and said what worked, what didn't, and changed the way we were actually interacting and changed the tooling to meet, the problems that we identified.
Yeah. So there's a couple of interesting nuances in there that I kind of want to unpack. The first thing that I heard was, you sort of started treating what you delivered as if you were like a product team, right? You thought of it as a product that you would take to market, where your customers happen to be internal developers. But and the reason I say that is a lot of people say, well, internally we want to act like a service provider to our customers. And while that analogy kind of works, I would almost argue that most people would sort of say, well, service providers in general are very good at kind of stable things, whether you're talking about the telephone company or the cable company or a wireless provider, but they're not necessarily the most innovative, the most responsive to end customers. But if you think about it as a product, then you've got to sort of know the market. You've got to have a direct way to talk to the market. So that was an interesting thing that I heard you say. And the other one was, you said this thing about ambassadors. Talk a little bit about what that was, because you had some interesting stories about how you made your customers essentially, your internal developers, ambassadors for the service they were using.
Okay, yeah. So if you take a look at your kind of first point in there was, being a service provider, but then starting to think more like an app dev or a feature or product team. I think one thing that was interesting when we went to thinking like a product team was we were accountable for what we were delivering. We weren't throwing things over the fence, and we cared what people thought.
Yep. And
we were in direct competition with the market. So a developer could Google something and figure out some way to actually get his app out on a cloud platform just as easily as he could use ours. So we knew that we had to make ours easier and give the developer more of what they needed out of the box. So features like logging and monitoring. If you expose this API endpoint, we'll give you a monitoring dashboard out of the box. Your logs will be collected out of the box. So as a developer, you don't need to do anything. So if you make it the path of least resistance in your platform, there's no way that people won't use it if it's giving them all the knobs that they need. Now, this is kind of twofold. When we get a call or get a page at 3 a.m, right, we know what we're supporting because all the apps are deployed the same way. Yeah. So we can actually dig into it and problem solve rather than each app being deployed differently.
Yep.
So that kind of is the first part of the question. So the ambassador model, I was a big believer of, I can't go and stand up in front of people and kind of shove this idea down their throats, right? I want them to say that it's the best way for them to do what they need to do. And I want them to get up on stage and say it. It's one thing coming from the cloud platform team. Of course, we're going to be trying to sell what we're producing.
Sure.
But for those guys actually to get up and say, look, this has made my life easier. I've been able to move between teams or features. I've been able to get code out in minutes rather than months. We've got our code coverage up. It's better quality. We're delivering better software for the business. That really speaks to the developers, right? Rather than me going up and saying all these things are great, having real use cases. And I think this stands for anything in the market, any conference you go to, somebody getting up and saying, we are solving business problems with these tools is always much more compelling than a vendor telling you that you can solve problems with this.
Right. Yeah, and you sort of told a story in there where you were getting into trying to decide, do I keep an existing application or a monolith, or do I try and break it into parts and do microservices? Share with people the story about how you kind of allowed developers to sort of realize that like containerizing some of these applications, even as is, was going to be a good thing, but kind of they came to it on their own recognition, if you will.
Yeah, so the container journey was kind of interesting. So it was kind of a social experiment internally. So as the cloud platform team, we'd already gone and taken a look at the market, and this was circa May 2015. So at that point, we'd actually made a decision that we wanted to invest in Kubernetes as our container orchestration framework. And the reason that decision was driven that early was we knew if we didn't get in front of this problem, we'd be behind it. And by that I mean developers would want this great container experience that they know and have started working with. And if we didn't give them a compelling reason to use our container orchestration, which we could give them a better experience overall and manage the change internally, we knew that we'd be running to catch up with them. So I was heading out on paternity leave around May last year, and I gave 2 of these ambassadors who had there were 2 feature teams. I gave one guy on the team and just said, look, here's how you create a Docker file. Welcome to Docker. Here's the three things you need to know about Docker. And I said, I've stood up a repo internally. You can start checking in your containers into this image repo. So I went off on paternity leave. I came back 2 weeks later, and literally my desk was covered in Post-its, and people are just saying, when can we go to prod? I'd never had that experience before with any other tooling I've written. It was kind of always like the doldrums. Please be trained on this way of doing business, and you need to write this if you want it to be deployed. It was kind of these guys were coming and saying, this is easier for us. We get this. The command we would type into the terminal to run our code, we're just putting that in a Docker file. That speaks to us. And really, this has been the foundation of, the great UX that Docker has created, right? So as a user, you can come along and with very little overhead, you can see the value prop straight away.
Yep.
So that was a telltale sign to me that, hey, we're onto something with containers. People like working with them, which is half the battle of getting somebody onto any platform. If we can just wrap this in a way that's sane and, provides all those nuances you want in a production system, we might be onto something here. So I actually came back for paternity leave. We got the team to rally around getting these things productionized. And we did a demo at OpenStack Summit in Tokyo where I showed the complete life cycle of us deploying from a Git commit out onto AWS and OpenStack, a single artifact, and actually doing a rolling update of that whole UX. So to be able to model and have that UX move from, hey, it works on my laptop, to it works in production the same way as it works on my laptop, that was something that was very compelling for the developers and for the cloud platform team alike.
Right. And we'll include the link to that talk as well. It's a very interesting, how to run OpenStack is sort of an application on top of Kubernetes, which kind of blows people's minds sometimes because they think about like, wait a second, infrastructure on top of infrastructure sounds weird, but it's a very good talk. It's a good explanation of sort of how do you think about these moving software-defined infrastructures. Let's talk a little bit. I mean, the talk that you give is sort of called, Microservices Memoirs, but you dig in a little bit to, you have some monolithic applications, and how did you treat them? I mean, was it, I have to sort of follow the Adrian Cockcroft, break them all up into microservices, otherwise I'll perish? Or how did you guys deal with that? And more so, like, how did you reconcile, potentially a monolith with something like Kubernetes, which people tend to associate just with, containers?
So what we did was go straight after, the new use cases. So we knew that the whole container experience for the company was rested on, how well the first few worked out. So we need to make the first few teams very successful.
Yeah.
And, have those guys lift up, because it could have just as easily gone completely the other way and we would have withdrawn and said, this isn't for us. So we knew that we needed to provide that really compelling experience that people would want to get on board. But when it came to looking at the monolith and whether it made sense to break it up, I think, one of the acid tests for us is, you've got to keep the lights on and keep the business running. Why would you put elements that are making money for your business at risk immediately? And I think that's just setting you up to have a bad experience with containers. So we were very pragmatic and said, you know what, we'll leave the monolith there. We called it the controlled tire fire internally. It's a known entity.
Yep.
And we've built a lot of tooling, and there's, however many years understanding how to wrangle that beast in production. And it's a known entity, right? It made no sense to break that up immediately, and I'm not sure that it ever does. You could change my mind either way, and it would depend on the use case. The other thing that we didn't go and touch is our system of record. So, when you go out and take a look at running databases on Kubernetes, there's some great content out there, and I have no doubt that it will work. But really, what we wanted to do is something we tagged as stay in the success zone, and that really was, where is the market external to lithium? Mm-hmm. And where is the technology in that market? And let's just stay to what that technology is delivering today. So if you rewind a year, persistent storage in containers was a little bit more of a problem than it is now.
Right.
Networking was another challenge. Firewalls, which, rolled into compliance and all those kind of things. So really we just said, look, we know what we have to deal with there. There's no point in lifting and shifting that. Let's have these applications born in the cloud. And I think that's really key to your microservice or cloud native journey is if you have applications born under the duress of, whatever running in the cloud is, people are writing them to understand, the nuances of that kind of infrastructure platform. So if you can start from scratch and you have that luxury, I think you'll be more successful in the early days. It's not to say that you can't forklift things in. Certainly you can, but I think you should ask yourself, really, what does it mean if this thing goes wrong?
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think you're pointing out a very important thing, which is, this isn't always strictly a technology conversation, because, if you just look at an application and the state of technology today, like you said, a year ago, persistent storage, sort of stateful applications, not really the sweet spot for Kubernetes, and containers. That's all evolved this last year. But for you guys at the time you were making that decision, it wasn't the right political decision. It doesn't sound like it wasn't the right organizational decision for, saying, hey, is this going to be successful and allow us to do more of this, or does this, a huge risk that might, kill off any momentum we have? And you kind of have to balance both those things and hopefully make the right decisions on both those fronts.
Yeah. It was interesting because the only real bet that we were taking, if you were to peel it all back, was the bet on containers.
Yeah.
Right? If we had that primitive, it didn't matter what we did in orchestration or the tooling around it, we could move and pivot. So being incremental, we could actually make a decision, was the platform doing what we needed it to do? And we knew that, containers were here to stay. So that was actually probably the only thing that we had to put chips on the table for, was this primitive is here to stay in containers. And, that was really all we were investing in at the time. And if you wanted to fail fast and be incremental, at any point we could have changed direction fairly quickly, knowing that the primitive, the container, would still be runnable.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In you, as you describe this, you start talking about, where you want to be opinionated in your platform. And I thought it was interesting. A lot of the conversations that happen in the market, people tend to talk about, the platform being highly opinionated. So, like, for example, the Cloud Foundry Foundation, and they tend to say, look, we are a highly opinionated platform, meaning, we dictate a lot of the choices that you're going to be allowed. And for certain things that works out very, very well. I've often used, a year ago, I was using the terminology, there's sort of, structured and unstructured platforms, or, composable. But you talk about being opinionated kind of before you get the application into the platform. Talk about why you sort of use that terminology and what you mean by, being opinionated for certain tasks and doing those really well.
I think it comes back to our learnings out of Cloud V1 and Cloud V2. So what we did was with Cloud V1 was we tried to be an inch deep and a mile wide, like an oil slick. Mm-hmm. So we tried to do everything for everyone.
Yeah.
And we did none of it well, right? It was a jack of all trades, master of none. So come and see us, and we'll be able to bring your own application, bring your own, design, bring your own stack, and we'll somehow tie it together and make it work. And what we found was we delivered no value from something that wasn't opinionated. So when we went to V2, we said, let's look at the 99%, right? What are 99% of the apps that people were developing internally? And that really came down to, what language are they developed against? What are the typical infrastructure asks? Do they sit behind a load balancer? Do they need one or more? Are they stateful? Are they stateless? And we actually found that we could address 99%. Right, and if you were to use another term for opinionated, I think it's just delivering features. So if you were to map opinionated with features and think about it as a product that has a feature roadmap, you could ask people for what features they'd want and bring them in and make it driven by the customers, rather than us on the cloud platform team coming up with what we think you want, which may or may not be true. So actually having it in lockstep with the developers and the people using the platform was incredibly valuable for us to, that was the opinion.
Yeah.
To go out and say, you guys are doing this team's doing this. Hey, you know what? They look the same. Let's just create this. And I think in most cases, probably you could go after at least 90% or up and follow the same pattern.
Yeah.
And, things like Kubernetes have kind of that app dev interface, so they get what an application looks like. Mm-hmm. So they give you load balancers and storage and networking. So they're kind of easy to work with to meet that 99% of what we were looking at. So
gotcha. So you're talking, so when you talk about opinionated, there is a technology component, but it's less technology centric, and it's more about delivering a consistent experience and hopefully one that, at least matches the 80-20 rule. And if it matches more than that, even better.
Yeah. And that was, if it didn't meet the 80%, we'd call it off the reservation, and we could actually work with teams to get their application out. But if it didn't fit, we didn't try to make it fit. And we also called out, you're not a good candidate to come on for this platform. So we were fairly, cut and dry. If people were coming to us with this requirement of, I need a stateful layer and this, it's not there today. We're not going to advise that you do this. And, come back and see us, or we'll let you know when we're in a state to actually handle that. So I think that was incredibly valuable to make us successful in that space was, only taking on cases that we were going to be successful with. And that was really what the opinion meant, was us saying, you fit the use case of what we're building with this platform, and I know that I can make you successful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. I want to be conscious of our time here. I'm going to ask you sort of one last question. And again, thank you so much for kind of walking us through this journey. I think there's a ton of things that people can learn from. You guys were obviously an early adopter of Kubernetes, and it's a little over a year old now. Obviously, you were playing with containers for a little bit longer than that. What's your take on just the state of the Kubernetes community and the market of people that are trying to use Kubernetes to solve these problems, whether they're cloud native or just building better platforms?
So yeah, I actually spoke at the Kubernetes V1 launch at OSCON in Portland, and I was up on stage there, and I think I said Kubernetes gives us exactly what we need at V1. So anything post V1 has been absolutely the cream on the cake. It's been additive to our experience. So just looking at what we've achieved in a year as part of that Kubernetes platform, it's been amazing to see that community grow, really get some steam behind it, and really solving some really unique use cases and making it very compelling to be on that platform. Yeah. I think one of the promises that we were really excited about with Kubernetes was that we could run it on multiple clouds. Right. And have a single experience. And really that promise spoke to us because we knew that if we bet on that API, that Kubernetes API, that things would come to follow. So, as we're at 1.3, now going to 1.4, things like federation and federated clusters are coming up, which is really exciting to me. We're looking at persistence. Those things are being solved. So a lot of those problems that I said weren't in the success zone, I could kind of move the needle internally now and say, look, these problems are solved. The networking stuff's largely solved. The storage stuff is largely solved, or at least on the way. So this is something that you can actually bank on moving forward. Yep. But what I'm seeing is people are taking Kubernetes and making it their own, and I think that's fantastic. With the inclusion of things like third-party resources, people are able to build against this API and leave their own thumbprint on Kubernetes. Right. So, I think that speaks to the platform and the way that it's been written. So I'm seeing some great use cases. I saw something that Kelsey dropped about Cert Manager for Kubernetes, which was fantastic. I see some interesting things over with Vault, so people integrating secrets management. And if you go and look at how they're doing this, it's very lightweight if you dig into how they're doing it. So it's really cool that people can take Kubernetes and make it their own and make it meet the needs of their businesses. So going into when as a solutions architect, I get to go and talk to a lot of people who are in the market or using Kubernetes and just seeing how they're solving problems with Kubernetes or how they're thinking about it. I'm like, wow, I would never have thought of this, but you can do that with Kubernetes. So, it's been really fruitful to see that that community grow. And with any open source project, it's only as valuable as the community and how inclusive that is and how they're managing the project and all the elements. And, it's been great to be a part of it and see it grow. And I'm happy to say that, I think it's a really great environment for not only developers but operators alike to actually solve their problems.
Yep. No, that's fantastic. I agree with everything you said. I don't think I'd have much more to add. And, like I said before, I really appreciate you, sharing with us your experiences and kind of, a lot of the things that are behind the scenes, sort of the psychology of getting people to buy into stuff, the how do you make people internally successful and want to go be, like you said, ambassadors for for using this technology and ultimately, hopefully, making the business, more productive, more successful, and so forth. So, Lachlan, thank you so much tonight for you and for Aaron. Folks, great show. Hope you enjoy it. Take a look at all the show notes. There's a lot of really good details from these talks, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.